Hello, Endeavor here. So I'm here for another stream tonight, and I have with me one of the most popular commentators in our kind of sphere of politics. I'm here with Devin Stack Blackpilled. How you doing tonight, Devin?
I'm doing pretty good. How's the former USSR?
It's actually not too bad, all things considered. Even though there's a war going on in the bordering country, things where I am right now are for the most part fine. So I'm glad to have you back on. It's been a couple of years since we've spoken, but the first stream I did with you was one of the most popular ones. One of the most popular ones I ever did. Actually, I think the most popular stream I ever had.
Maybe we can shatter the record.
Well, we'll try to break that. We'll try to break that record with this stream. So what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the generational divides in what we call today clown world. The chaotic world that you and I always give our commentary on day in and day out. How are the different generations? How are they processing it all, and how are they getting along and getting on with it? Because I know that you've spoken a lot about the baby boomer generation and the post-war era, and kind of how we've slid towards the situation we're in today. And one theme on your channel has been, looking back at the previous couple of decades and how we kind of got to where we are now. One thing that really stood out to me at the end of last year and beginning of this year, and this is kind of what really got me thinking about this stuff. Now, I've thought about the generations before, but the thing that really illustrated it a lot for me was the contrast between how people my age and my friend group from back in Canada and how our parents' generation processed the pandemic. So I visited Canada for the first time in several years in December, and I stayed until January. And it was really just kind of weird, the different people that I spoke to, because all of the guys my age, some of them are red pilled to various degrees. One or two guys I knew from back then they're really cued in, and some of them they're kind of cued into some of the red pilled stuff, but they're kind of still kind of blue pilled on a few other of the more spicy issues. But almost all of them agreed that 2.5 years they had been absolutely screwed. They felt like it was totally corrupt. That they had 2 years stolen from them. That all the restrictions and the mandates and everything were totally unjustified. And they basically thought that the government was pretty much out to get them. Whereas all the our parents' generation, these were all boomers. I'm 28, so I'm a younger millennial, and our parents were generally in the boomer generation, so in their 60s or so now. None of them thought that anything corrupt at all had happened. It was like the narratives the narratives on the TV, that was reality for them, whereas the younger people really processed it differently. So I wanted to get into this topic of like these generational divides. So we'll start off with we're not going to go back to silent generation, even though a few of them are still running America. We'll start with the boomers to keep things a bit shorter. But what would you say about the boomer generation, and how are they coming along in the present day?
I would say a lot of this you can see even just with this stuff that's going on in Israel, where the differences in how they're perceiving that conflict on Twitter and stuff. And I think a lot of it comes from where they trust, what source of information they trust. Boomers were brought up by television, and because of that, they raised their children on it. But you have this not unwavering trust. I think, prior to Trump, you had an unwavering trust. If it was on TV, then it had to have happened. And I think now there's maybe a little bit of a doubt there, but not as much as perhaps in these circles. I mean, you said that, you had friends that were cued in, and then, well, I think you have a lot of boomers that are QAnon in, and
oh no,
they're going like off the reservation with their view of stuff. But I mean, there's a few of those, but like, generally speaking, I think they still stick to whatever the normal thing is, and so they're kind of prisoners of the context of their upbringing in a lot of ways. I guess everybody is, and so specifically what you see a lot of on Twitter with the Israel stuff. A lot of boomers, their parents fought in World War II. They fought the evil Nazis and blew up the devil and freed the Jews, like some kind of biblical type of story, right? And so they have a lot of pride wrapped up in this, and it's really a big part of their identity. Similarly, the civil rights movement is part of their identity and part of a source of pride for them. In fact, I guess in a weird way, maybe the boomer generation was the last generation that had a lot of pride. Maybe that was their sin. They had so much pride, like everything. Because if you talk to a boomer about, the 60s or even the 70s to some extent, you don't really hear a lot of negative stuff. It's all this very we were going to change the world. If there's any negative, it's just that their big dreams never materialized later on, or that their children, the millennials dropped the ball or whatever, right? And so it's kind of it's kind of, I think that's what it is the big difference is where they got their information from and who is telling their narratives. We know now today that having access to the internet has really broadened the views of a lot of people, but I would think that the boomers probably think, maybe to some degree, television did that for them, right? Like it allowed them to go, you could see the world. You didn't have to read a book anymore or trust what was in that old, dusty newspaper that grandpa's reading or whatever. I can see things in color, in fact, initially in black and white, but then when things went to color, it was like, I think that, because they've watched things live. Of course, I know what's going on in Gaza. I've seen people in helmets and flak jackets ducking behind sandbags to the sounds of air raid sirens going off in the distance. It's almost like I've been there, and that's the other thing too, is because all that information was curated. I mean, because it's true, like, when you watch a movie or you watch a television show, whether it's fiction or fictional news or even true news, you're going to have some kind of an effect as if you were actually there. There's no interaction. People, they've done studies on this. When you sit down and you're just passively taking in information that's coming out of you from what used to be the CRT tube and is now the LCD screen. You're basically just a receptacle. You're just sucking it all in. And so I think these people that have experienced a lot of fiction and a lot of nonfiction, well, maybe not as much, not nearly as much nonfiction, they feel like they've had all these experiences, and that's what informs a lot of their worldview. And how, the History Channel, for example, like it's not just the news that they trust. They'll trust the History Channel or Netflix documentaries or whatever. And I think that you have that kind of passive understanding of the world where you can't really push back on it, or if you do, it requires a lot of work. You have to go to like the library and look things up, or subscribe to some weird newsletter that puts you on an FBI list or something like that. Like there's not like a whole lot you could do in the 70s or even the 80s or even up to the 90s, really. And then you have Gen X, which is kind of on the cusp in between these two worlds, where they're familiar with technology, but they were raised on television, and so they're kind of like have a foot in both worlds. And I think that if you know Gen Xers, you sometimes meet some that are very boomery, but then you meet some that are very much like millennials. And then millennials, they grew up on the internet more so than on television, but television was still very popular, and it's to some degree it still is. I mean, at least in the form of streaming services, right? But it's not till you get to the Zoomer generation where they don't even remember a time without the internet. They grew up, many of them, with touchscreens. Like they didn't. Not only did they grow up with the internet, they grew up with smartphones. And so it's this totally different way of taking information in, being able to interact with it, being able to challenge it. And you would expect that to have, I think, that would increase the or I guess decrease the passivity of them. But I don't think it does. I think that it's just been gamified, right? So instead of just sitting there on a couch and watching the information come at you through pixels or scan lines, they're interacting to some degree, but it becomes more of like a game, and more of it's engaging, and maybe it's activating the brain in a different way. But I still feel like there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, you mentioned that the boomers saw videos on TV of air raid sirens going off. I just thought it was funny that last week I actually did hear a real air raid siren go off myself, unlike any of the boomers back home that I grew up with. So thankfully it was a drill, though. But I just thought that was funny. I think that if I had to sum up kind of how the boomers are today and the way they interact with the world as it is, it's just like they don't really seem to understand the existential threat that our society really is in. And a lot of people kind of understand that things are going in the wrong direction, but they might misinterpret a lot of it or have like totally incorrect views, like I believe the leftists who basically want more of the same. But with the boomers, it doesn't seem like they understand the real seriousness of the situation. With things like these elections now, like there's this sinking feeling in these Western countries, the United States, Britain, Canada, that these elections no longer matter. They don't even care about the people that they represent. No matter who you get, you're going to get someone who's going to stab you in the back, and they have their agenda, and they're going to go ahead with that regardless of what anybody wants. With the boomers, they seem to be the ones who are really kind of still fixated on kind of this like parliamentary electoral politics, this kind of artificial left-right divide. It's Republicans and Democrats. In Canada, it's the conservatives and the liberals. And they don't really seem to understand the real seriousness of the situation. And it's not even just with the political stuff, it's with the economic stuff as well. There's that famous kind of catchphrase that the boomers have, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, bucko, and you got to get out there and put in the hard work, and many of them don't realize that when they bought their houses, they that cost them a fraction of the price that a house would cost today. When I was growing up, almost every family in our neighborhood owned a house of some kind. Many of them who were not very wealthy at all. Many of them were single income households, but they still lived in houses. Today, though, that's like an absolute pipe dream. The houses that the house prices in the neighborhood that I grew up in, this would be around 2 or 3 million Canadian dollars, which in U.S. equivalent, that'd probably be about 2 million to 1.5 or so, roughly. And they just don't really seem to be able to comprehend the real problem with the society today. And I feel like with them, they were the ones that the post-war consensus, the ideas that basically led us to where we are today, which started around, you can say, early 20th century, but then really started to kick off following World War II, and then since the 1960s, this has basically been the entire the worldview that we've been living under. For the boomers, it kind of worked for their entire life because they didn't know a world before that. They never lived in the pre-war world. So the baby boomers are the generation that were born following World War II. So they didn't know the world before that. And I don't think that I think they're too old to really kind of conceptualize the world that's becoming right now. So they don't really understand the big mess that they're really leaving behind, because throughout their entire lives, like, we can talk about all the problems that were birthed in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but for the most part, an average guy could meet a woman, have several kids, have a house in the suburbs, have a car or two, have his 1 or 2 vacations a year, and for the most part, life was good. And a lot of them don't really understand any of these existential crises that we would talk about, because for them it just doesn't seem like it's something that really matters that much, because they've lived under, they've reaped all the benefits of the post-war abundance, but they're not going to live with the consequences of the incorrect ideas that it was all based on.
Yeah, I mean, this to some degree, it's you can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of a thing. But also, I think the deeper thing is if you suggest that things were better when they were younger and that they're bad now, the implication is pretty strong that they had something to do with that. Like if you rent a car and you bring it back and they said that that dent wasn't there before when I lent it out, that they're implying that you did that, right? And so there is a lot of motivation to deny that things have gotten worse, especially when the kinds of things that have gotten worse certainly cannot be undone in their lifetimes, and maybe in no one's lifetime. When it comes to like the diversity issue and stuff like that. So when you're basically saying, "Hey, you had this wonderful thing and you ruined it," they don't want to believe that. And even if they did, I think that at the age that they're at now, they're just kind of like coasting anyway. They're just sort of circling the drain in a way, lazily on a inflatable, donut in a in-ground heated pool in the backyard of the gated community. But they don't really have anything invested. I mean, they already got theirs, and they're the selfishness of that generation is I think unique, to say the least. And so not only do they say, well, you should be able to just be a shoe salesman and afford like a 4-bedroom home or whatever and raise a family on that, because maybe that's what they did or were able to do. They also don't I hear a lot of older people um, uh, I'm into ham radio, and there's a lot of old boomers into ham radio, and so you hear a lot of these conversations that they have, and it's abundantly clear that they not only have no intention of leaving any kind of inheritance for their children, it's almost like a race to get to spend all of it before they die. And they congratulate each other on mass, like I've heard 85-year-old men talking about how they just bought some $200,000 sports car, and you're just like, why? like what, don't you think that would have been maybe like really helpful to your, or maybe they don't have any kids, but like to your son or grandson or whatever, like that's you're spending 80 grand on a car that like you're gonna drive around maybe once a month, and to fulfill some weird, rosebud like childhood fantasy. And the answer is yes. And they don't, and part of it is they don't have a self-awareness when it comes to their age. Like growing up, as a child of boomers, one of the things that I kept noticing as they would, advertising was very much geared towards them, especially when I was younger, because they're the ones that were the decision makers, the ones that had the money, and they were always or raising the bar for how old you could be and still be considered like a young, hip, cool person. So I remember like the terms that they would use, 30's the new 20, and then 40's the new 30, or maybe 40 might even be the new 20, and pretty soon, why 50 is not that old, or you would see like the advertising for these old people products that just as a consequence of their age, they were being marketed, to them, like Viagra and stuff like that. And it was never in the context of like, hey, you're old, so you need old people stuff now. It was like, nah, you're young, and just that the age is just a number, and just because of that number, you might need this old people stuff. But there was still this idea that you're forever young, and it's shocking too, because you would see, you would think they'd have a little self-reflection. I did a couple videos on this years ago where they kept remaking, or rather not remaking, but making television shows that featured the boomer childhood. Like you had like the Wonder Years, Happy Days, these nostalgic type shows where all it was is it was just a show set in a whiter America, America that was less diverse and more prosperous and safer, and had more Christian values, and it was more cohesive, and they would try to play up the dramatic events of the civil rights or whatever, but generally it was like this happy childhood story. And so that was the kind of media that they produced, and they would have us watch, and you'd sit there and watch it and be like, well, I want to live in a place like that. How come? Why is this so different than my reality? And it was weird because even though I was like a child or a teenager, the boomers' response to this would be like, well, that's because your generation is a bunch of nihilistic assholes, basically. Like, you and your death metal and whatever, your gangster rap, like that's why you don't get to live in this, as if we were the ones producing that. So I think that they're, like I said, they're a product of their childhoods, and they're just incapable of learning that stuff. Hang on one second. I'm gonna put I don't know if you can hear Churro going nuts out there. Churro's a feral cat that came out of the desert randomly about a year ago during a stream. And now I feed him, and now he's in the house complaining and making a noise. So I'm just gonna put him outside real quick. But
yeah, sure, no problem.
Take me like a second. Hang on one second.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so one thing that he'll be back in 1 second.
Buddy, you want to go back outside? Oh, sure.
Okay, are we ready to continue? Okay, good. Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned briefly was that they really still seem to be one of the last generations to have trust in mainstream institutions. One thing that a family member, and I don't want to talk badly about my family because I do love them dearly, but one thing one of them said to me was like she was absolutely shocked that people were getting their news from social media. She said, "Can you believe it that today some people get their news from Twitter or Facebook? My goodness, how can somebody consider themselves informed if they get their news from that?" As if the people running the news stations can't possibly have an agenda of their own. And with them, a lot of times they listen to Canada's version of BBC. It's called CBC. It's the the government-run national broadcaster. Kind of like, and it's like CNN tier stuff. It's this libtard trash, but a lot of times like they'll have this on loop, and if you consider that, if they consider that they're spending their entire day listening to that, it's not that hard to understand why someone like that would believe that, say, 2020 to 2022 there was this deadly pandemic going on, which was just ravishing the country, because they're not out there living in the real world. They're just in their homes being told what's going on in the world by the TV. Probably the last generation to actually watch TV. But the boomers did have some kind of idealism as well. You mentioned they had some pride, and they had some things that they actually could be proud of. Like I mentioned, America, Canada were really nice countries when they were growing up. Could have been, maybe they were headed in the wrong direction, but ultimately life was still pretty good. I guess we can shift to Gen X now, because I think that the big divide between Gen X and the boomers is kind of the optimism and the idealism of the boomers, where it was kind of traded for this. I would say that Gen X is a lot more nihilistic, so they don't really have that same perhaps naive pride that the previous generation did. So what would you say about Gen X?
Well, I honestly, the reason why I think you don't hear about them much is they never really got a chance to make any noise. The boomers made so much noise that it overpowered anything influential, or that they could be they could do influentially. Because even now, look who's still running for president. You have the boomers have been holding on to dear life. It's not just these geriatric people running for president, or being president, or being all these senators, or these guys that are mentally losing their grip on just being able to read a teleprompter. But you have this is what it's like in a lot of corporations. There's a few exceptions. You have like Silicon Valley, just because a lot of that technology came post boomers. So that a lot of the Gen X and millennial powerful people come out of Silicon Valley. But outside of that, I mean, in pretty much every industry, it's still being run by boomers. And Hollywood was no different. I mean, you would have young actresses and young actors and maybe even directors and writers, but the studio heads were always boomers. And so the people calling the shots were always these really self-important boomers that had a particular worldview, and that was exactly how they were going to project it on everybody else. So I just don't think I think that the Gen Xers, in addition to never getting a chance to be at the wheel, they were also kind of just I mean that was when you had the beginning of like latchkey kids, right? Like they didn't even, not only did they get ignored in the public space, I guess you could say, they got ignored at home. They would come. I mean, I had friends that were they had divorced parents, because like divorce got big, I'd say, in like the end of the 60s and then throughout the 70s, and then also carried out throughout the 80s. And I mean, I had friends that would go to school, they would come home, and no one would be home until like maybe 6 o'clock. And then their single mom, working single mom, would come home at like 6 or 7. They wouldn't cook dinner or anything like that. They would have expected you to have already done that. And they were so tired, they were exhausted from working all day. Many of them just went either straight to the living room to watch TV until it was time to go to bed, or they went out with friends, leaving their kids alone. And so I had friends that like essentially they didn't have parents. And I had parents. I had, my parents weren't divorced or anything like that. But my dad would work, like he would be gone for work. By the time I woke up to go to school, he was already gone. When I would come home, my mom was wrapped up in whatever, delusional hobby she would get obsessed about, periodically. And then my dad would sometimes not, like, because he worked 2 jobs, and then for a while was going to school at night and just whatever. But he was effectively not around ever. And I think that there's a lot of millennials and Gen X, anyone with a boomer parent, that can relate to this, where you're growing up and maybe your parents are physically there, but they're not there. And in fact, if you look at like the Gen X or even like older millennial kind of movies, right? Like The Breakfast Club and stuff like that. That's the narrative, right? Like when these teenage kids are sitting around and they're all these different kinds of kids, right? Like there's this one kid that's a jock, and one kid that's like the troublemaker, and one that's like the nerd, and one that's like the little princess or whatever. And the one thing they all have in common is that their parents are out to lunch. Like their parents are not involved. They have no idea what's going on in their lives. And, in fact, in a way, it's an extension of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's just like, it's almost as if boomers were always saying that, even when you were like 6, like, oh, go out and see the world, Billy. And I saw this in my education. I was in it was a gifted program in California. In fact, there's a lot of conspiracy theories on 4chan about this. It was called GATE. And one of the reasons why there's so many conspiracy theories about it was really weird. And now for a lot of people that went to this, they would take you at a normal class. I went to a school that the entire school was GATE. So I was never in a normal class. And it was run by the hippies, basically. It was like hippies that were they had access to these high IQ kids, and they were just told to like, oh yeah, try to be creative and let's try to expand their minds, man, and whatever. And as a consequence, there's a lot of the fundamentals that I was never taught, because like instead of like, like I'm terrible at spelling, just as an example. Like thank God for autocorrect is all I got to say. Because during that time that I should have been learning normal things like spelling and whatever, they were having us like grow radishes in some garden with like and almost in this like do whatever you want and for 3 months, and then we'll weigh the radishes, and whoever's weirdo conception worked the best, then yay. Like there wasn't even like a prize. It was and so you're just, and then like there was just like all this really obscure education that you could tell even then that they didn't know what they were doing. They were just kind of like they were just kind of like winging it, but also they really believed in it, like in how they were winging it. And so I think that the Gen Xers and especially like the older millennials that have boomer parents, you had this situation where the adults were essentially out to lunch. They didn't. Many of them, with some exceptions, like if you lived in a Christian household or something like that, this would have been a little different. But I mean, I in high school, I remember going to friends' houses, like because they were throwing kegers or whatever, and their parents would be there drinking with us, and it was, to me, this was baffling because I grew up in a very religious household, but this wasn't like an anomaly. This happened time and time again, where you had these parents, because they didn't want to grow up. They wanted, they wanted to stay, the hip and cool people. So even like when you were in high school throwing kegers, it's like you couldn't escape these people. And in fact, even as I got older, I remember when I was in my early 20s, one of my friends' dads, boomer dads, got divorced, and he started just showing up at our parties, like where this weird old guy with a fucking Hawaiian shirt would just show up hitting on young girls, and it was just really weird. And that's just, I think that the reason you don't hear so much about Gen X is they're just basically they were the ignored generation. I mean, there's the silent generation, but I think there's the ignored generation, and they kind of like in that environment learn how to entertain themselves and just kind of keep them to themselves and not really rock the boat, because you have a sense of powerlessness that goes with that. It's like, well, they're never going to let go of. It's like the movie Office Space, right? When you get that boomer boss that's like Bill Lumbergh, where it's like, you really, that describes that described my job so well. When that movie came out, I quit my job. Like, we watched it at work as a team building exercise, and I quit my job along with 3 other people the next day, because we're like, we work at Initech. Like, this is insane. And so but that was the thing, is you're working for these people, that are making like 3 or 4 times what you're making, and they're not even competent enough to do even like the lowest paid guy's job. And so you just kind of, it's like this learned helplessness to some degree. And I don't think that people really snapped out of that really until the younger millennials, where they were less influenced by that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No, I don't have as much to say about Gen X, probably for the reason that you mentioned, that they're kind of one that's been kind of glossed over. You hear a lot about the boomers, millennials, and then Gen Z, but not so much about X. I mean, one thing you brought up was that, like, it's kind of when the family disintegrated, because you see with the boomers, that most of them grew up with families intact. Now, I was lucky enough that my family remained intact, and my parents were both in my life growing up as a kid. So I was actually very fortunate in that regard. A couple of my friends had divorced parents, but most of them had stayed together, though. But you do see, like, you can even look at the pop culture. So one thing that my dad always pointed out is, he said that Disney hated parents because in all the Disney movies, the parents would always get killed or something like that. Yeah, and I just remember, like, how many different works of pop culture from the late 20th century did the main character lose their parents? There's Star Wars, there's James Bond, there's Harry Potter, and then a bunch of Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman. He doesn't have his real parents, but I mean, it's basically just every character is like, to be a movie, comic book, TV hero in the late 20th century, you had to have been an orphan, because I don't know. I guess that means that you were the bucko who pulled up his bootstraps or something like that. And then the other thing you'd see is that in these sitcoms, then the dad would always be an idiot. So you'd have the Homer Simpsons, the Hal from Malcolm in the Middle, or who else? What other examples were there? Like it was always the dad in the sitcoms, and sometimes the mom as well. They were always like totally dysfunctional morons, really. So you kind of do see that pop culture kind of pushing the disintegration of the family. And this is what the Gen Xers would have been watching on TV. It also seems that like this is kind of they also seem to be this very nihilistic generation, as I mentioned. So they had things like what is it, MTV or Kurt Cobain, and Kurt Cobain was cool because he I don't know what did he do? He said that like I don't know, America was racist or something like that, or that it was run by imperialist capitalists who wanted to be wealthy or something like that. It's before my time, but this is the kind of message that you get from a lot of Gen X, media. Like there's that show Daria. I never really watched it. I saw a couple of episodes, but I know that this is like some have said that this one kind of summarizes the Gen X attitude. You think today that, I mean, in America, the boomers are still holding on to power, and even believe it or not, some of the silent generation. Biden isn't even a boomer; he's silent generation. It's incredible. Like a lot of the guys in America are pushing 80, and they're still holding on. But you see in some other places that some of the Gen Xers have kind of gotten to power, and they really seem to be this the kind of the Davos class really seems to be very Gen X. Now I know Schwab himself is a silent generation as well, but you think of people like Justin Trudeau, you think of people like Emmanuel Macron, or various leaders. Actually, I mean, that Rishi Sunak guy in the UK I think he's actually a millennial, but anyway, beside the point. But they seem to be very like post-national. So you kind of see like all of these you kind of see all of like the nihilism, the deconstruction that happened when they were young, kind of really playing its part in politics now. Whereas the boomers, they had that kind of naive pride and naive optimism. They loved America, but or whatever country they lived in, but it was based on them. Oh, I don't know, like fighting the Nazis in World War II and having Martin Luther King or something like that. It's obviously a naive and misleaded kind of pride, but it's a pride nonetheless. Whereas with the Gen Xers, they just don't seem to have any of that at all. I guess the attitude that you'd get from them is that, well, why do we care about religion? It's just something that was made up to control people. I feel like the new atheists, I know they themselves were boomers, but that kind of attitude, that kind of resonated with I feel like it really resonated with a Gen X kind of crowd. They say, well, why do we care about nations? Well, those are just lines on the map, made by somebody arbitrarily. Why should I be separated from some other person in the world because of some passport I have, or things like this? It's just kind of this nihilism really seeping in. And I do feel like you're seeing that kind of in a lot of the politics today, that they have this in this like post-national kind of politics that, you see these days that all these world leaders couldn't care less about the countries that they're actually representing, because they haven't been raised to have any kind of particular connection to the land that they were born in.
Yeah, I think that all those things are true. And then if you want to maybe look at the way they might have been a little more optimistic about it. I mean, if you look at a television show like Star Trek, the Star Trek: The Next Generation or something like that, that was very popular in the I think the late 80s. It started in like 89 or something. But then it went throughout the 90s. But even with, Star Trek by itself, it wasn't just like the only vision of the future, but it was a popular one that eventually that we would all of our, it was just a continuation of the civil rights movement, where it was a civil rights movement with teleporters and spaceships, where eventually all of these racial differences would go beyond, not only would they be meaningless, but differences between species would be meaningless. And we'd be flying around and sharing our wealth with far off worlds and spreading, and I guess that's the other thing too, is you still had this idea, because in Star Trek, it's kind of like they're like the US and the Middle East, where it's like we're going to spread democracy in the middle. And so you kind of had that in Star Trek, where like we're going to go to this planet and give them, membership into the Federation. They can join the UN, is basically what they were saying. And so I think you had that kind of a worldview going on, and that's how they saw things, is that it was just an inevitability. The broadcaster Art Bell, he was right leaning to some extent, but mostly a libertarian. And at one point, he did a conspiracy radio show. He'd get a lot of conspiracy people calling up, and people would get very upset because he didn't seem to be against the New World Order or whatever, and wouldn't focus on that. And his response was, well, it's just one of these things. It's going to be inevitable. So it doesn't really help to fight it, because as the world gets smaller and technology gets better and, transportation gets bigger, and, it was just like this inevitability that you couldn't escape. And so why bother? And, I don't think, he was boomer. He wasn't, he wasn't a Gen Xer, but a lot of Gen Xers were listening when he said that, and that resonated with them. And I think that was kind of that was the idea. It's kind of like, well, you mentioned atheists, the erasure of religion from popular life during these generations, like after the boomers. Same sort of a thing, right? The boomers kind of failed to transmit the religious culture to the next generation, because either they stopped believing in it, or we got in the way of their hedonism or something. But they didn't really do a good job of passing it on to the younger generations. And so, and even if they had, the younger generations would probably be to some degree disenchanted by it, because the boomer behavior didn't seem to line up with these religious traditions that they were telling them. So critical, right? In fact, that was always the big Christianity criticism when I was, when I was a kid in the 90s, when you'd watch these movies that would criticize Christians and Christianity. That was the big thing, right? They're all hypocrites. They say do this, but then they're doing this. They say be chaste, but then they're having an affair, and this kind of a thing. And so you just, in fact, if you didn't know Christians personally, and all you knew about Christians was from Hollywood movies, or Jewish Hollywood movies, it would be, oh, Christians are just these really judgmental hypocrites, and that's really what it boils down to. And so that was kind of like the perception, I think, of a lot of irreligious or less than religious people. And so they were ripe for the picking when atheism started to get real big. And so once you start, it's kind of interesting, because I kind of feel like, for example, when people talk about race realism and differences between different groups and stuff like that, you would think that when you discarded religion and started looking at things as we're just these animals that are evolving on this planet, that's the sort of thing that they would gravitate towards. But that wasn't what happened, right? It was almost kind of a weird thing where they looked at they looked at all the different people of the world as a single unified species with zero differences. And I don't know exactly what the reason behind that was.
Well, I think it's social status, because dunking on Christianity, that's something that that was cool, that was in fashion, because basically due to mostly Jewish run media. I mean, you made that video about the Simpsons a couple of years ago, which was a really good video, by the way. And it showed like how the Simpsons basically undermined the Christian religion, and they started off being kind of respectful, but then also kind of getting in like some small jokes here and there, to basically coming to the point where they're just outright mocking it, and then people would just go along with it. I think the reason that the Gen Xers, like I mentioned, they're really like nihilistic, but what they're not above though is social standing and of trying to hold the socially acceptable positions. So they believed all this stuff because the media that they were consuming, and the lessons they were being taught in school were telling them that this is what you're supposed to believe. They had MTV. I know I didn't grow up with MTV. It's again kind of before my time, but they'd grow up with these values, but then they're not gonna lead that to their like the logical conclusion in that nothing is sacred, because they still hold things to be sacred. They don't hold God or Christianity to be sacred. They don't hold the nation to be sacred, or the race or anything like that. But they still do conform to the egalitarian zeitgeist. So instead of it's incredible that someone like Richard Dawkins, again, he's a boomer, silent generation age, but his kind of followers would have been mostly Gen X, I would say, maybe some millennials as well. But it's incredible that someone who wrote the book The Selfish Gene, which is a pretty darn good argument for ethno-nationalism, and some right-wingers back in the 70s and 80s even tried to use it as that. He's somebody that says, oh, no, we're all Africans. We're all the human race. It's because, he's somebody who doesn't care about actual truth. He doesn't, or actual science. He may have been a decent scientist, but what he cares about most of all is social standing. And that's why this kind of nihilism, this Gen X nihilism, and you'll see this nihilism as well. It's strategically deployed. So, they'll say, well, the Earth is just this one tiny little planet in this huge galaxy. And, well, why is one border more important than the other border? And who decided this? And, they play this like this kind of nihilism. But then if you respond to them, well, if that's the case, well, then why should I care about racism? Why should I care if Black people feel aggrieved by the behavior of white people? Or why should I care about what Jews say happened to them during World War II? I don't care. Well, then they'll freak out at you. Then they'll say, oh, how dare you say that? You're a horrible person. Because the nihilism is selective. It only goes so far. It only goes so far as to deconstruct what is actually stable and healthy and good for Western civilization. But when it comes to the poison and the meta narratives that are used to push that, they'll defend those with religious like fervor.
And I guess that's probably what explains a lot of the Zoomers buying into like the homosexuality stuff and the tranny stuff and all that stuff. I think the reason why, because it's the same thing, right? Like I've mentioned to Zoomers, like, wow, you by the numbers, you're the gayest generation by like a landslide. There's like something like 20% of Zoomers identify as LGBT something, right? And they'll respond with, well, it's just because it's cool. They're not really non-binary or whatever. It's just that it's cool to say that you're one of these things, in the same way that it's cool to celebrate your mental illnesses or whatever. Not that makes it any better, but I think that's probably the motivating factor behind this. Even though they've got access to more information, they have an upbringing that would be cohesive to accessing that information, and they should be able to do this with an ease that would like I remember trying to teach my mom how to use a mouse, and it was such a struggle because every time she'd click, she'd move her whole hand and like drag all the icons on the desktop like off the screen and stuff. And I'm like, just no, you click with your finger, don't move your whole arm. And so compare that to a Zoomer who's as a toddler is using a touch screen. But the reason why they don't is as you said, there's this social pressure. This you want to have you want to be high class. You want to be considered one of the genteel people. You don't want to be one of these classless racists or whatever. And so I guess what it boils down to is who's defining that. Who's defining what's cool. Who's defining what these standards are, and who filled that vacuum when Christianity and the WASP ruling class kind of lost their hold on Western culture. Now I know we're on YouTube, so I'm not going to go into too much, but I think everyone knows the answer to that question. But I think that's that's probably one of the biggest. Even with the boomers, that was a big motivating factor. Where you had, the civil rights movement was this same group of people was, they were the pioneers and the architects of a lot of that stuff. Even the hippie movement, like Abby Hoffman, and he did the flower power stuff, and all the, Larry Brilliant and all these people. And so I think that in many ways, because every generation is kind of a product of their environment, it might be more useful to look at, well, who's creating this environment? Who's informing this environment? Because people care so much about status, and they do. Women more so than men, but men care about women, and so they, they want to have access to women. And I'll tell you one thing I noticed, even just as a conservative, before things got really polarized. Now, granted, this was when I lived in like leftist utopias like Washington, D.C. and San Francisco and stuff like that. But I would know low value men that were didn't make as much money as I did. We're not very pleasant to be around. Weren't particularly handsome, or in some cases were even like morbidly obese and stuff. And they would get access to women because they were male feminists, right? Like they were male feminists, and they thought Obama was great, and that they were anti-racist and all this sort of a thing. And I just, as a normal at the time, I was not an extremist by any means. I was maybe a libertarian leaning conservative. That's all it took for a first date to go south with a lot of these women. You would just say, that you didn't think Obama was the second coming of Jesus, or what. Like, you wouldn't even have to say that you didn't like Obama, or you just had to say you didn't love him, and that was enough. They would shut down, and you realized, oh, okay, this is not a good thing. And so I think that kind of has driven a lot of the attitudes of people. Because even though men are less susceptible to this kind of influence, they're susceptible to the influence of women. And so giving women the ability to, I guess, handing women the keys to the sexual marketplace, I think has had a lot more of an effect than people realize. I mean, a lot of people focus on stuff like, oh, well, you've got all these, like you have like the no fault divorce and all these men's issues and these things that have increased in the last several decades, and the family courts and all this other things, the things that immediately affect men. But they don't realize that, but in doing this, they've also given women a lot more power, which in turn has given the people who influence women a lot more power. And I think that if you look at the boomer generation, one of the things that always struck me about older movies, like from the 70s, going on into the 80s, is you would have situations where men would act in what appeared to me as someone who was much younger in very rapey ways, and it was socially acceptable, right? Like, so even like if you look at Blade Runner, in that first, there's that scene where Harrison Ford, like that would be considered rape if that was in a movie today, where he goes to see that the replicant girl or whatever at her house, and she starts to struggle, and he's just like, no, he keeps kissing her and holding her against the wall, and she's like, no, stop it. And it would be sexual assault today. But that was, when that movie came out, which was what, like 82 or something like that. No one, I don't think people in the theaters were thinking like, oh, he's sexually assaulting her. No, he was just dominating her, right? Or I remember I was watching an episode of All in the Family when I was doing a stream about All in the Family. I wanted to go through these episodes, and they had one about feminism, and the do nothing son-in-law and the daughter are having this argument because she went to some feminist rally. And even though they're both liberals, both these characters, for those of you not familiar, All in the Family was a Jewish produced, Norman Lear produced television show that was basically deconstructing the nuclear family and trying to make the silent generation look ridiculous and racist, and they had this character that was like kind of like a Homer Simpson type character. And in fact, in many ways, it was like The Simpsons, because the daughter was kind of like Lisa. She was ditzy and a little stupid, but she was kind of like, woke, I guess, for back then. And then, the son-in-law was kind of like this dopey guy that was also very progressive and whatever. And so it was like this. It was like a young versus old, left versus right. You watch the show and the young ideas of these progressives and how they conflict with the older silent generation and so forth. And you have the story arc where the old racist silent generation guy slowly becomes woke and whatnot, as you often see in these shows with these characters. But anyway, so the young daughter, she goes to a feminist rally, and her Democrat, basically socialist husband is backing her up when she's arguing about feminism with her dad, until she mentions that men and women are the same. And he gets very offended and says, no, hold on. You should be able to vote and whatever, but men are superior. He uses that word in the show. And she gets really upset. And when they kiss and make up at the end of the show, at that point, it's been settled that, yeah, men are superior. Like, that's the word used. Men are superior. We'll still let you have rights and stuff like that. You're not property. We're not going to beat you and stuff like that. But men are superior. And that was a progressive television show. And so boomers are watching that in the 1970s. And that's their idea of what the progressives were like, because that's what was acceptable. Right. So there was this assumption in the 70s, I think specifically, and it started to die off in the 80s, and it was totally dead in the 90s. That of course, we can. I mean, you got to think in the context of the 70s. In the 70s, if a woman wanted a credit card, she needed, like in the 70s, she needed her husband's permission. Her husband had to sign a form allowing her to have a credit card, and that was the 70s. That wasn't that long ago. And so that was still the context when the boomers were growing up, that okay, women can vote and whatever, and they can maybe even run for office in some instances, but it's gonna we're gonna keep it within reason. And but for the most part, as long as it's agreed that men are still superior, you know what I mean? And
well,
so
I think maybe rather than superior means like kind of like the leader of the family, though, right?
No, he meant like superior. Like he said
Okay.
that, like he said, like for, I think the example in the show that he was using was like, the men. I think he outright said, "Look, men are smarter and stronger and just better at stuff, and you just have to deal with that." Like there was that plane of language that they were the leaders. They were certainly they were dominant, whatever. But he was saying that they were superior in the way that like any supremacist would mean that. And so it was just odd to see that, because I'd never watched this show in my life. And I was aware of it because the reruns on Nick at Night or whatever, right? It just never looked funny. And so when I went and dug up these episodes and watched this, I was kind of just stunned. I was like, wow, like this is the subversive lefty show, and they still are implying that there's a massive difference between men and women,
Yeah. I mean, well, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that the big difference is that men are at the wheel, and that should be to some degree unquestionable.
One thing you mentioned was that a couple of decades ago, maybe like maybe not even a couple of decades ago, maybe even 10 years ago, you'd have it that if you said something bad about Obama, that then then that date is over, and you don't have a chance with that woman anymore. Thankfully, I didn't run into that myself, but I think that this is kind of like a very millennial kind of attitude, because we can move on to the millennials, because I find with them that they kind of regained this idealism, but without the pride. So their idealism, was under the assumption that, everything was horrible, and we need to basically destroy this society. But then they actually do believe that we're going to build like the egalitarian utopia out of it. Kind of strange that it seemed, because we'll get on to Gen Z later, and they seem to be nihilists again. It seems like it's idealist, nihilist, idealist, nihilist. That seems to be the pattern. But with the millennials, they seem to be like the true belief, the kind of the true believers in globo homo. So they would have come of age in, say, the 2000s and 2010s. They were kids in the 90s, and in the United States, maybe the first president they would have voted for was Barack Obama. Maybe that was the first election that they had the chance to vote. They got to vote for the first Black president of America, and the idea is, oh well, we're progressing towards this racially just society, and a lot of the millennials really believe this stuff, and they really very fervently got behind a lot of these causes. The phenomenon of what we used to call the social justice warrior. I guess you'd call it the woke person today. Now, I know that this kind of type has existed for a long time. I know that they had these types in basically ever since a certain tribe of people arrived in the West from the Russian Empire. Then North America has had this kind of type of person, and they were this type of person back in Eastern Europe as well. But the archetype that we know today, the blue-haired, gender studies major, thick frame glasses, the type, the kind of the stereotype, that seems like it's a very millennial thing, because as I mentioned, like the Gen Xers seem like really nihilistic. That one of them could get behind something like new atheism. I think that this is kind of where like new atheism and a lot of its adherents kind of morphed into kind of the woke left today, where you see like the Gen Xer, he's like, well, I don't care because it's all just countries are just lines on the map. Religion is just this made up fairy tale, and we're just mammals, and none of that matters. And so, smoke weed and enjoy your life, and engage in whatever hedonism. Whereas with the millennials, they seem to really fervently believe in this kind of stuff. So they do not have the same kind of nihilism that they don't have the same kind of nihilism that you would see with Gen X. So I think of movements like at least the LGBT stuff over the last decade or so. Up in, I'd say from the 2000s and 2010s. I mean, now that like the Zoomers, it's just going off the rails, but we'll get to them later. That just seems very millennial. Something like BLM seems very millennial. It's this kind of idealism. And the other thing I'd say about them is that they're also the first generation that never really grew up, because and they're also the first one that was pretty much incompetent. Because say what you want about the boomers actually did have a childhood, but then they actually became adults. They actually, and not that I want to play into any of their catchphrases of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but they did actually go out and get jobs. They actually went out and had families. They actually took on responsibility, and they were able to run things efficiently for the most part. I'd say that the boomers' failings was not that they weren't competent. It's that they had, it's that their ideals were wrong. Their worldview was incorrect, but they were actually competent at running a society. And I'd say that Gen X, for the most part, that's true with them as well. Fewer of them would have gotten married, had kids, and fewer of them would have had the same stable career and the same prosperity. But with the millennials, they're one of the first. They're kind of the first generation that doesn't seem to have grown up. And you think of things like Harry Potter, for example. I had this joke from a few years ago. I said, imagine if there were a bunch of 35-year-olds running around in 1980 who are still obsessed with Howdy Doody, which they watched on TV when they were 7 years old. Well, if you're a millennial who still likes Pokemon, that's you, because they haven't grown up. They haven't even grown out of their comic book little like cartoonish cartoon characters that they watched when they were 9 or 10 years old. They're still obsessed with that kind of thing. So they seem like this very idealistic generation, one who are that many of them are real true believers in global homo, but also that they never grew up, and they're also just not they're not as they're not competent either. They don't seem to be capable of running a society the way that even the boomers were.
Well, I think the answer to that's simple. I think that they're the first generation that grew up and was educated in a system that had removed all of its standards in order to accommodate diversity. And in fact, would especially with, you mentioned the women who increasingly those are the people that are in charge, right? Whether it's in charge of some HR department or in charge like AOC or something like that. It's they were the benefactors, especially the women of these programs that really lowered the bar, and that in fact would go out of their way and bend over. These institutions would bend over backwards to try to promote these people and push them through the institution and get them all the right credentials, and tell them how smart they were. In the same way that television was telling, the advertisers on television were telling the boomers how special they were and how, unique they were. And that's why you need to buy a Volkswagen or whatever. These millennials were being told by, from kindergarten up, the self-esteem movement, right? That was a big problem. That was the
participation trophies.
Right. Yeah. Like we can't have winners and losers. We don't want people to feel sad. And I remember at the time, older boomers on like Rush Limbaugh, like on talk radio, being very concerned about how this was going to turn out. Like you're coddling your children, or like just playgrounds, right? Playgrounds went from like these metal death traps to like these nerfy, little like it was impossible to hurt yourself. When I was a kid, they were just starting to get rid of this stuff and make the transition. But I remember there was like this slide that it was like ridiculous. Like it was probably overly dangerous. It was like 20 feet high. It was metal and it was baking in the sun. So like you'd get like a 3rd-degree burn if you touched it with your skin. And then if you fell off of it, you were going to break at least a bone and maybe die. And had been there since like the 1940s or something. It was just like this dangerous metal slide in the middle of and it was like, I think it was like gravel underneath it. Like, so it wasn't even like a soft landing. And you go from that to like all the, the plastic nerfy stuff. And you also kind of, one thing I noticed, so there's a big age difference between, me and my younger brother. He was born, I think when I was like 14 or something like that. And I remember when he was growing up, he was, he was into like I was really into video games when I was younger. I was really into video games like Nintendo Super, we didn't have a Super Nintendo, but I had like a Sega, a Dreamcast and Nintendo 64 and all this stuff. And then, graduated to like PC gaming. I was really into, Unreal Tournament, first person shooters and stuff, and really competitive about it. Which is in hindsight super gay, but just to set this up, that I was really into this stuff, and I had moved out of the house and I was living on my own and still gaming, and I had to go I forget why, but I had to go to my parents' house for like a week or something, and so I was so much of a gamer, I brought my computer with me and set it up on my parents' kitchen counter so I could still play games while I was at their house for the week. And the thing that baffled me, I was like, hey, come play the game, like, because I knew how my parents were. They weren't going to have any high tech computers in their house. Like that's why I had to bring mine. And so I knew it was going to be like this. My video card was for the time was like super mind blowing. I thought he'd be like really excited to play this computer, this gaming machine that at the time was top of the line. I spent like half my paycheck on it, probably, right? And I said, come on, come play this. I forget. It was like one of the Battlefield games or something like that, I think. And he played it for like a couple seconds and got killed, which is in a first person shooter happens all the time. You're constantly getting killed. And then he didn't want to play it anymore. And he just wanted to watch me play it. And I thought this is like the opposite. When I was a kid, my older brother and I would get into fist fights over who had the controller, like I play next. No, I'm going to try this again. No, you just died. Let me play. Like that was the competitiveness when I was with my older brother. With him, he was very passive, and it was just he preferred. And I remember thinking like this is weird. And not too much longer after that, you had stuff. and all these gaming streamers kind of come out. And I remember being like, not being able to relate to this. Like, why would you want to watch someone else play a game? You know, like, wouldn't you rather just play the game? Like, it's not that you can't get, it's not like some game you can't get. Like, this is a game that everyone has access to. So, and you're probably watching it on a computer that's capable of playing it. So what's the, I don't get it. Like, what's the deal? You know, like, I don't get sports ball either. So part of me just doesn't understand spectator things like that. But at least with sports ball, it's something different. It's like, it's people doing athletic feats that you're probably not capable of. So I can at least kind of understand why you would want to watch that. But when you're watching someone playing a video game for 4 or 5 hours, it just doesn't make any sense. And so like I said, it's that passivity again, where it's like they don't want to participate. They don't want to actually be involved in the experience. They just want to sit there passively and suck it up. And I think that, part of that might be because, like I said, the inability to have people experience failure. You mentioned the participation trophies, that sort of a thing where, you weren't allowed to fail in the education system. You weren't allowed to fail in team sports. You weren't allowed to fail, really at all. And it's, you need to fail. Like, you need to fail. You need to experience failure in order to overcome failure. Otherwise, you're stuck in this this rut of failure. And I think that's partially what's going on with younger millennials and Zoomers, is they've never had to experience I mean, this is not really the right term, but in a way, I guess, selection pressures. Like, they've never had to overcome any kind of selection pressures that they have to then evolve to adapt to. And I guess I think that's probably what you're saying.
Yeah, and I mean, along with that comes kind of this, that they can't be allowed to fail. The participation trophy kind of thing. What comes along with that is the broader egalitarianism, the idea that everyone is brilliant in their own way, and just because this person isn't as successful as this one other person, well, that must be because this person hasn't been given the correct education. They just, or that they face discrimination, or just any kind of excuse. It's with that comes like this that it makes it impossible to recognize differences. It makes it impossible to recognize anything of quality, because everything's kind of reduced to the lowest common denominator. Everyone is just as good as the person who finished last in the race. Therefore, there can't be an actual winner, and from that comes this attitude that, well, Somalis, well, they just don't have the right education, and they're actually a lot more intelligent than you in some ways, because they have this dance that they do, and it's so cultural, and it's so brilliant, it's so amazing. This kind of thing. There was this funny video from a couple of years ago of this really embarrassing performance in Australia, that they had this this performance which involved this white woman playing piano and singing, and then it had some of the Australian Aborigines doing this song, and it basically was just them like hitting some sticks and then like quietly muttering some words unintelligibly to themselves. And the funny thing is that the Australian Aborigines, they were actually laughing, because even though they're like probably the lowest IQ group in the world, even they could realize how ridiculous the situation actually is. But then this mostly white audience, they're made to like go along with this and actually take this thing dead seriously. And if you dare, say that this is kind of ridiculous, well, then you're going to be the first one. So someone saying that in the chat that it actually wasn't a white woman. It was it was a tranny that was playing the piano.
Even better.
I didn't even realize that. It's been a couple of years since I've seen that video. I'd forgotten, but yeah, I mean, that's like, just that video is so millennial, because it's just this like ridiculous idealism taken to, and this ridiculous idealism along with this like this extreme egalitarianism, and then also like the worship of the foreign as well. This may be Gen X, this may be millennial, I don't know, but when people used to go off to India to try to find themselves,
My
when
gap
did they
year.
You did that?
No, the gap year. I'm going on my gap year. You know that video?
Gap year. Okay, so it's some Australian guy or something doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm going on my gap year. Oh, these Peruvian flutes are so amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I really I don't like at all, is just like this this like fetishization of all that's foreign. Now, I mean, I do like a lot of like European cultures, like a lot of them fascinate me
I think the reason why you see Westerners do that, like anyone who's internet dated and looked at a woman's profile, that's like a red flag if you see her in a third world country, posing with handing out water bottles or like whatever excuse she had to go get drunk and bang a bunch of people in random countries,
and then also show everyone how good of a person you are.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I think the reason this fetish with the exotic, I think part of it can be explained by the fact that you were told that white people didn't have a culture. Yeah. And so that was one thing you could like, okay, you could notice that, say, these darker complected people were not performing as well as you and your white friends academically and in other ways. But the one thing that they did have that would I think produce some envy is they had culture. They had this mystical thing called culture. And I think that's why you had this phenomenon of I don't know if you're allowed to say it on YouTube, but instead of the N word, the W word, like these white people that would try to dress black and stuff like that, and they would speak as if they were black. Yeah. And then you also had to another degree, it's the second DNA testing was available, I remember so many of my white friends rushing to get their DNA tested to see if there was a little drop of diversity in them, so they could somehow brag that no, I'm not white. I'm like like Carl Benjamin. My grandpa's black, or
oh God, yeah.
They wanted to have like that one little thing that made them not white. Like it was so uncool to be white. They were driven, and I think that's what it is so they've been programmed to believe that there's so much important, and in fact it's almost that's the thing too, is it's almost more special and better than anything they can do, because while a darker complected person from another country could potentially get good at algebra, you can never become part of their culture. It's not something you can attain. In fact, I mean, as we've learned, you can't even like dress up like them for Halloween anymore. So it's this thing that you can't even earn or build up to and get. It's something innate in these people that and it's always an advantage they're going to have over the white man. And so I think that it's just a lot of white people crave that. It's just that they've been told that they don't have anything like that. When of course the opposite's true. It's just that their culture is so popular, it's spread to the whole world to some extent, and in fact a lot of it's been suppressed and redefined by that same group that makes all the movies. So it's but yeah, that's I think that explains a lot of this.
Yeah, it definitely does, because you even see in all the commercials, like there was that YouTube channel that basically showed like how white men are portrayed in commercials, that they're always portrayed as being dorky or stupid or being an asshole or something like that. Yeah. And the minorities are always portrayed as being cool, and just pick whatever product it is. It's the silly, stupid white man using the inferior version, and then the cool, slick black man probably with a white wife using this brand superior version of that, and showing everyone. Well,
just
cool
look at in the 90s there was Def Comedy Jam, and it was a big bulk of it. It was just black people making fun of white people and for not being cool. And I remember watching, I think it was like Cat Stevens or someone, And it was late at night. I wasn't supposed to be watching. I snuck downstairs or whatever to watch this. He was like on HBO or something like that. And I remember being confused by his jokes. And one of the jokes stuck in my head because it was so puzzling. But the whole bit was if you call up a number and you get a wrong number and it's a black guy when you call up, they're always like, very aggressive and angry and hang up on you. And if you call up a wrong number and a white guy answers the phone, they're like, oh no, I don't know who that is, but hey, I can help you find them, and they're very helpful. And the crowd's laughing their ass off. Like this is like some big own on white people that they're nice and helpful. And I just remember I was like, I don't get it. Like,
yeah, it's weird. There was that video this past week. I didn't watch it, but I saw it being shared around on social media about like black people making fun of what white people do while hiking.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'd be surprised. I mean, I didn't know that black people went hiking. So, but apparently like what white people saying something polite to you while they cross you on the path while hiking. Apparently that's supposed to be weird and uncool. And the other thing that I really just despise about all this, like this kind of idea that like white people have no culture, which is totally ridiculous. But what's so annoying about it is like the things that they actually uphold as quote unquote culture are just the most superficial things in the world. Like what do they say really is black culture? Like really, it's just stuff that was made by Jewish media for them. Like it's hair, it's this dance, it's the way that it's this kind of hip hop music, and it's like if that's like the extent of your culture, then you're the one who doesn't have a culture. And need I remind you, it's being produced with the technology created by the white man, wearing clothes created by the white man, in the language, in the white man's language, and it's just totally absurd to say that that we don't have a culture, but it's also just like the just dumbing down of the entire idea of culture to the lowest common denominators. Like none of these like either because the other thing to mention about the millennials is that they were also the first generation that was, I think they were still the majority white in the United States. It's definitely the case in Canada, but there was a large percentage of them that were non-white. This kind of culture that the non-white millennials cling on to as being so important to them, and the white millennials idolize and fetishize and wish they had so desperately. It's just the most like it's just the most superficial thing to be considered culture. So like if you take something like Shakespeare and the themes of Shakespeare and how, and like there's just so much more, there's so much there to it. It's not even just the stories itself. It's just everything much deeper than that. Like what it would have said about England of the 16th and 17th centuries. There's so much there. But with these like cultures, or something I use very loosely, it's just, it's food, it's dance, it's hair, it's clothes, and then there's nothing more to it than that. So I would say that like with the millennials, like their entire idea of culture is really it's just a consumer product, really.
I think part of it too is we talked about how a lot of them were ignored by boomer parents, and so they're very starved for attention from the boomer parents. And if there's one thing that boomers made clear to their kids is that diversity was good and exotic, and whether you're talking, and it could just be something as simple as dad sitting on the couch watching a bunch of black guys running around throwing a ball at each other and getting excited about it. Or it could be like when I was a kid, my mom got emotional once. She picked me up from a bus stop and she saw me talking to some black kid that was wearing a red jacket. And she asked me like, who is your friend? And apparently I don't remember the exact wording right this second, but like I didn't describe him as the black kid. I said he was the kid in the red jacket or whatever. And it was a very red jacket. and she got emotional because I didn't say he was the black kid. And so, our diversity experiment's working, And I think that, and because you had like, cultural days as multicultural.
I was told something similar when I was a kid as well, by the way.
Right. Yeah. And so you learn when you're a kid, like, oh, wow, my parents really like non-whites. And so does my teacher, because today we're learning about, Honduran
Nelson Luther
history,
Floyd. We're learning about Nelson Luther Floyd Jr.
right? Or the Native Americans, or whatever. And so, and it was always special, right? Like that was always considered like, oh yeah, today is the day that we find out that, or there's a whole month for Black History, so that implies there's something special about that, and that the older people in charge approve of this. And so if you're a kid that's being ignored and you want to be noticed by people, you might, in the same way that I think Zoomers are latching on to this LGBTQ stuff, I think that to some extent millennials are latching on to the diversity stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing with millennials is that they were with them, they actually live their own values to an extent in terms of the diversity stuff. Because there's this talking point you often hear on the right where people will say that that shit libs only support diversity because they live in gated communities, which are 99% white, and they have very little interaction with it. That's kind of true with boomers. But with millennials, that is not the case. Like, first of all, millennials can't afford a house in a gated community, and secondly, a lot of them grew up in these like diverse neighborhoods, and a lot of time, a large portion of their class at school would have been non-white, and a lot of them still pursue these kind of ideas, even though it's like patently detrimental to them. So things like affirmative action, for example. I mean, you probably saw that report from Bloomberg a while back that it showed that I think that of new corporate jobs in 2021, 96%, or I think it was 94% of them went to non-white candidates, meaning only 6% of new jobs went to white candidates in corporate America. I don't know what the criteria was. Was it Fortune 500 companies or something? I don't know, but basically what's happening is that they're just refusing to hire white candidates, and a lot of millennials will a lot of these kind of liberal and leftist millennials will go along with this stuff and still say it's good. The boomers, affirmative action existed in their day, but remember that it was a lot whiter of a country, that these countries were a lot whiter. America would have been 60-70% white. No, it would have been like 80 or so percent white at the time. Canada would have been like around 90% white, 95% at the time. So even if affirmative action existed, there was still a very small pool of people that would be put above you. Whereas today, I mean, it's like with younger generations, they're like, it's only about half white. And then if they have these affirmative action policies, you have no chance of getting that job. But a lot of these millennials, like these white millennials who like are clearly being screwed by this stuff, will still say they support it out of this kind of idealism. And even probably the most ridiculous example ever is what happened with that like libtard activist in, I think it was New York City last week, that he was stabbed to death in the street by some black guy who I think was like, I don't know whether he was drunk or on drugs or whatever, or just generally a psycho. They're just walking. Him and his girlfriend were walking at night. We're walking home at night, and they don't cross the street to get away from this guy. He's clearly not in his right mind. He clearly looks dangerous. He stabs the man to death. Man, when I say man, it's a word I use very loosely in this case. And then his girlfriend doesn't even report the guy to the police because she doesn't want to because he was like a victim of discrimination, and she doesn't want to uphold stereotypes or something like that. And I mean, this is not somebody who supports diversity because it's often far away, and it's just a social status, a status symbol that doesn't actually affect them. This is like Jonestown level stuff. This is somebody who is willing to basically get killed in order to stay on the right side of social status. And a lot of millennials are like that.
No, that so much of this is status. It's like, and I think part of it isn't nefarious. Part of it's just like, when I've worked with fairly wealthy people in the past, and one percenters, and close proximity, and occasionally one of them's black, right? And it's like a exceptionally high IQ black or whatever. And so when you're in that circle, and of like say 140 plus IQ, high earners, and the only black guy they know is this exception, this 140 IQ guy, and they do live in neighborhoods. I don't like that couple you're talking about. They were probably in like a gentrified neighborhood in New York and dealt with diversity, but they're not like the people setting the tone. They're the ones that want to live in Manhattan. They want to live in the neighborhoods where there really isn't guys like that wandering around, right? They want to live in the Martha's Vineyard neighborhoods that don't want the immigrants shipped to their island. And so I think that they are big believers in it because it's status seeking. It's in the same way that like during with this Israeli conflict that's going on right now,
the new current thing,
the big if you want to knock yourself out of polite society, then basically you don't just support Palestinians, but just don't shout your support for Israel. Like if you're not being very vocal about supporting Israel, then you are basically, it's a status thing. You're going to lose status. You're going to lose a lot of your money. You're not going to get donors giving you money. You're not going to get we have presidential candidates in the presidential debates wearing Israeli flags on their suits in pins. And so it's a status symbol. Like you're basically saying, no, I'm with the rich and powerful people. That's what it is. When you support Israel, you're saying, no, I support the rich and powerful people, because the second you signal that you don't, then the rich and powerful people have no use for you. And if you're focused on social climbing, which I mean, to some degree, everybody is, and many people more than others, but everyone to some extent. No one wants to be considered low class, and because all the things that come with high class are not just creature comforts, but it's real ability to provide for a family, and real wealth and stuff. Like if you want access to the tastier table scraps, you're not going to bite the hand that feeds, right? So I think to some degree that's what's going on there. Is you have these, if you're in New York especially, I think that if you're in New York or San Francisco or DC or LA or one of these big cities where a lot of this money is concentrated, the personality type that goes there, a lot of those people are not from those cities. In fact, almost no one is. When I was in DC, I think maybe 1% of the people that I encountered were actually even from the area. Like not just, obviously almost no one's from DC, but not even like from like Maryland or Virginia or whatever. Like they were from completely different parts, as was I. And for the same reason, I was there because I was pursuing a high paying, high status job opportunity. And for me, initially it wasn't really tied to politics. But for a lot of these people, they're also pursuing political power. Like if they're going to DC to be a lobbyist or to be a congressional staffer, and then maybe later on they've got political aspirations or whatever. They're there to get power. So they're all about this status climbing. And New York, even though it's not the political center, it's certainly the financial center. And it's certainly in some ways the Jewish cultural center in America. I mean, it's a tie between New York and Los Angeles. And so you have that same thing. You have these people that if you're there, you are, I think, abnormally susceptible to this kind of desire to promote whatever the new thing is, even if it means putting yourself in danger. And so I think that's probably what what you saw in that video is just a woman who the whole reason why she's, in fact, maybe the reason she's with that guy might have in some way increased her status. I mean, I'll tell you, the first question when I was in DC and I would meet new people, it doesn't matter if it was a man or a woman, the first question they would ask you is, "Oh, how's it going? What do you do?" Like before anything else. And it's because they wanted to know, are you above me or below me in the hierarchy? And if you are above me, then I need to be a little subservient and like try to ingratiate myself to you. if you're below me, I need to try to get loyalty from you, like so that you dangle something in front of you so that you can maybe be useful to me in the future if you know if I determine that you can be useful. It was very much like it was all about you know, social status, almost the entire existence of these people's lives. It didn't matter if it was like it was real difficult to have even just like a casual conversation about anything in that city. You know, the surrounding areas were a lot better, but like when you were in DC, it was a complete it was everything was about status and power, everything. And I think that's probably true in New York to some extent, and it's probably true in LA. Obviously, I got a lot of friends that went to LA because they wanted to make movies. You know, they wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg or whatever. And a lot of these guys end up on sets. Maybe they're a cameraman or, you know, some lower end kind of job, but they're at least they're in that realm, right? Like they get to go to the rap party. You know, they get to maybe they don't get to talk to her too much, but like they get to talk to the famous actress that's, you know, the hot new actress. They get to at least, you know, shake her hand or something, or say hi to her when you're at the craft service table getting coffee or whatever, right? You're getting the taste of it. You'll never get to get a real bite of it, but you get the smell in your nostrils of this power, this prestige, and you're so intoxicated by it, you don't want to jeopardize that at all. Like you're terrified of doing, you know, one little misstep, and you know, you get labeled as that guy, he voted for Trump. I mean, that gets around in Hollywood. You're just not working again, you know. And so I think that's kind of what's going on in the more powerful parts of the country, and because they're the most powerful parts of the country, they set the tone for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Toronto, and that city is known for like uh, just going off the rails with the woke virtue signaling stuff. Yeah, I mean, all of it really, and it's basically all of it is basically just to demonstrate how good of a person you are according to the establishment morality, really. Um, and the millennials are definitely like chock full of they're chock full of that. They do like desperately want people to think that they're this morally superior person. And unlike with the boomers, they've actually like sacrificed life and limb in many cases. I mean, maybe that one case is a bit extreme, but like definitely sacrificing, you know, personal dignity and career prospects and everything like that for and maybe personal safety in some cases of their neighborhood becoming more diverse in pursuit of that kind of social status. I guess we can move on to the Zoomers now, the last one we were going to cover, because with them, I think you know, I mentioned that we kind of have this pattern that is the idealists, the nihilists, the idealists, and then the Zoomers seem to be nihilists again, in contrast to the millennials' idealism. You mentioned earlier that they are pretty much the first generation to not know life before the internet. I mean, I'm kind of on the border here. I would say I'm a younger millennial. I was born in '95, but I do remember life before I mean, my family had the internet when I was young, but I know I didn't really start using it until 2006 or so, and I didn't even I didn't have a smartphone until about 2016 or so. So I mean, I remember life before you know, the days where you were on the internet 24/7. A lot of the Zoomers today, it just seems like their entire reality is the internet. So, I mean, with them, you know, some people have made this comment that one of the reasons that a lot of the post-war narratives, you know, things like the worship of you know, of Jews and the narratives from World War II, and then maybe some of the other aspects of that narrative as well. Some of that seems to be dying off, not because the Zoomers are all based and red pilled, but because they can't take anything seriously. They're kind of this generation that has been taught that absolutely nothing is sacred, much more so than just the Gen Xers. So even the idea to them that there are any social norms, even though, you know, the ones that were imposed post World War II were unhealthy, even the idea that there are any norms, there's anything that can be held sacred is they've just been thrown out the window by the Zoomers. The other thing about them is that they just seem to have like this. Some people have made this have noted this as well, that they really seem to be kind of devoid of the the broader culture that we all grew up with. And I think that I've made the point before that culture is kind of just a dead culture, and it's just nothing has been brought in to replace it. So we're just seeing like it's just being recycled over and over with all these Hollywood remakes and everything like that. But with the Zoomers, like nothing has come in to replace them. So what they're left with is these like 10-second TikTok videos or these 10-second YouTube short videos, where it's some person, I don't know, telling you 5 interesting facts about Colombia, or somebody showing you how to make a hard-boiled egg or something like that for 20 seconds, and then that's it. And this is the kind of stuff that a lot of these Zoomers are consuming. One thing you'll note, I've also watched some videos, not that many, but a few of the videos I've seen from Zoomer YouTubers. One thing I've noticed about them is that every 5 seconds in the video, there has to be some loud noise. There has to be some like flashy thing on the screen. It's like you basically see that the attention span has been dropped to such a degree that if there isn't some loud effect or something to recapture your attention every 5 seconds, then they're just going to switch off to the next one.
Yeah, I'll tell you that I can see the value in some of the stuff, right? Like I think part of it's because if you have a tutorial video that's supposed to tell you how, like so often, right, YouTube has replaced Google for how-to type stuff, right? People used to look up text that would tell you how to rebuild a transmission or whatever it is you're trying to work on, right? And now that's just people want a video that does that. And so I think that part of it's a product of people looking for how-to videos, and then it's like a 20-minute video, and there's really only 5 minutes that of that 20 minutes that tells you like how to do it. And so that they're just trying to streamline that process. But the other part of it is just like this eternal ADD, right? It's a little weird. I didn't have the internet when I was younger. We got it. We had BBSs initially, so you'd have like a dial-up modem, and you would have, it was all text based, obviously. Even at school, like that was like, it wasn't a dial-up modem. It was, we were connected to some network that would connect to other servers, but it was there was no mouse clicking or anything like that. It was all typing in these archaic commands and obscure things, and it was really difficult to use. I remember the library did like this hour-long presentation trying to explain like how you could search their database for books. I was just like, even I, as like a high-tech kid, was just like, I don't get this. Like, it's just like the least user-friendly thing in the world. But then like it kind of evolved, and so I've kind of seen the evolution, especially in video, because that was always my focus. I was one of those dorks that initially wanted to go to Hollywood and make movies. And so I was making movies with my dad's camcorder when I was a little kid. And I remember being very excited about the way technology and the video technology was going. I remember being really excited because I got my first DV camera. It was mini DV, like it was. So there was no analog quality loss, right? Like it was still on a tape, but you'd record it, and then it would go through FireWire. That's something that doesn't even exist anymore, but you'd capture it through FireWire digitally. So it was like, however it was recorded was exactly how it went into the camera. And then you could edit it. Like there was no generation loss. You weren't having to like record, from one tape to another tape and then back to this tape or whatever. And so like, as things got more and more digital, I got more and more into the digital side of things and doing, After Effects and 3D animation and stuff like that. And as the technology increased, that you also had the people that were able to access it widened, right? Like it used to be, if you wanted to be able to edit video, you would have to rent time. If there was a digital place to do it, you'd have to rent by the hour the time to use these computers to do nonlinear video editing, and that all changed fairly rapidly. From these Avid computers that were $250,000 to a PC that was maybe still $2,000, but And now you can edit videos on your phone. You can shoot and edit. Your phone is basically a television studio. And it's to show you, to get an idea of how rapidly it changed. I mean, just remember Back to the Future. I remember they make that joke because he's got that JVC camcorder and he's showing it, Doc, that, oh, look at this, when did Back to the Future come out? Like 85 or something like that. And so he's showing this guy from 1965, the new technology, and it's this ridiculously large camera with a big tape in it. And the Doc's all super impressed because it's like a TV studio all in this one little thing. Well, now that is in everyone's pocket, and it's a million times better, and you can even broadcast it from your pocket. Like, you don't have to go upload it from another computer. You can just hit upload right after you're done editing it, right directly to thousands if not millions of people. And so as that has kind of evolved, I think it's gotten a lot more competitive, for eyeballs. Like, the competition for eyeballs is, you have all this content out there. So if you make content, it's got to be really flashy and quick to the point. And because really it's about the amount of views you get. And you're going to get more views if your video is like 30 seconds and it's just some hot girl lip syncing some song, than you are going to be if you do a video about Shakespeare or something like that. It's just that's the way that is. So to some extent, I think it's organic, but I also think that a lot of this is if you're a baby. I mean, think just in the difference in video games. If you're a baby that's raised on a tablet where you can just, whatever you're working on at any given moment, with a gesture of your hand, it can completely change and be something else. You can be reading about this and then just, swipe your hand, and now you're watching a video about that. And then you can swipe your hand, and now you're looking at, a video game, or, playing Candy Crush or something stupid. You compare that to when you were a kid in the 90s, you usually, if you bought a game system, you would buy one game at a time, and they were really hard. There was no auto save, and you would just sit there and play the hell out of that game until you beat it. And it could take months, right? Or you could,
or you had to sit down and watch a 30-minute TV show and actually be focused on that 30 minutes at least.
Right. And there was some structure to it. So, because you couldn't record it, so everyone had to go and watch it at whatever it was airing. And so you paid attention to it, because it's not like that. It wasn't like as disposable. It wasn't like, well, I'll just have this episode of whatever playing on my other screen while I'm doing this, because no, it aired once, and then you didn't know when it was going to air again, and you might have to wait like 2 years before it's on DVD or whatever, right? And so it commanded your attention, because it was either now or never when it aired on, tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Central on Fox. Like, you'd be like, oh, I gotta watch that episode of X-Files or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so it was like an event, and that's totally different too, because now it's like, I mean, I have a low power analog TV station in my house that plays I have a video server that just plays stuff. And so I can turn on these old tube TVs that I have in different rooms. It started out as a project for that cat Churro. So when he was out in his little shed in the backyard, he wouldn't feel lonely. I know it sounds weird, but so I made Churro TV that would like broadcast into that little shed, so he'd hear voices or whatever, or something, some noise. And then it turned into like this little project I did for fun. And it's just noise in the background. It's just something that's going on. I don't pay attention to it at all. Like in fact, there's a TV in the other room that's just going, right? And it's just white noise basically. And I think that's what a lot of this stuff has become. It's just white noise. Even my stream to some extent, people tell me all the time, oh yeah, I listen to your stream while I'm doing work or whatever. And that's also, I think, why audiobooks are more popular. People, they'll just put an audiobook on and do stuff. Then who has time to sit down and actually read something for a day or whatever?
Yeah. Do you want to add something to that?
No, I was saying, I think that it's just the value has changed, like, cause it's so common. It's just so disposable.
And the other thing from that is that there's no longer any shared culture. So you mentioned that there'd be that thing that was airing on Fox at 8 p.m. on Thursday night, and it's going to be on once, but then everyone's going to tune in and everyone's going to watch it, and then you go next when you go to either school or work the next day, everyone's talking about it. Like let's say the show Survivor. I remember that was pretty popular when I was a kid, and we'd see it, then our friends would say, "Well, can you believe this person got voted out tonight? I didn't see that coming. Who do you think is going to be voted out next week? It's going to be this person. No, it's definitely going to be this person." There actually was a shared culture. Now, I do think there are some negatives of your shared culture being via the screen, because even then, that was a culture that was shared, via the screen rather than in person, which is never as positive. But today, I find like the boomers, the Gen X, they all had a shared culture. The millennials had a shared culture too. The only problem is that culture ended 20 years ago, and they've just been stuck in the past for the last 20 years. So like they're still obsessed with Harry Potter because nothing has been made. Which they read when they were 10, but now that they're 35, that's the only thing. That's still the newest thing that's been produced. So they're kind of stuck in this like cultural loop. But there actually is a shared reference point. But I'd say with the Zoomers though, like, will they even have any of that? Because it seems like what's going on now is that people are being kind of like siphoned off into these different ghettos of the internet based on some like weird, obscure niche interests. And that's kind of like what's driving the culture. But then it can't even really be cult culture, because it's just like the people who are sharing it, they don't have any real like actual interaction with each other in the real world for the most part. And then one thing you mentioned earlier is with the Zoomers that what was it, like 20% of them or something, or even more, are identifying as LGBT whatever. What was the number?
I mean, it depends on the polling data, but I did see one poll that was over 20%.
Yeah, I mean, God. But this is social status. So like we mentioned with the other things, like this is basically, especially for the white ones, this is they don't have anything to any kind of identity to hold on to. So they've kind of latched onto this manufactured identity. And what it seems like kind of trying to be a video game character in real life. So, it's this, think of the LGBT stuff, like that you can be, you just determine whatever gender you are, like as if you're customizing some video game character. And that thing can just be changed at any time. So one day they are, the next day they're something else. And they kind of go through the motions of just, changing something which is supposedly supposed to be like really important about their identity. This like the LGBT stuff, it's all like manufactured. I don't think this is a legitimate identity, but it's at least they'll swear to it that it's extremely important to them. But then it just changes on a dime, and you even see this with like younger people, Zoomers, who are involved in even like our sphere of politics. You'll get like one day there'll be a Nietzschean National Socialist on Twitter. The next day there'll be a pagan. The next day there'll be a traditional Catholic. And then like this is supposed to be like these extremely deeply held values, but then they change it as if it's just like an outfit. It's just like this uniform that it really literally is this. It's just an avatar on Twitter or on whatever, or on Discord or whatever social media site they're on. It seems like the idea now is that the Zoomers seem like they take things like identity, things like that are maybe even religion in some cases. I don't think most of them are actually religious, but they take these things as if they're just kind of some attributes of a video game character, when this is something which would have been extremely important to people in the past. So somebody's like ethnic identity, for example, that's something that's deeply important to them. Someone's religion was deeply important to them. Some Catholic is not going to become an Orthodox Christian because he thinks that that religion is more based, so to say. Like that's, they would fight wars with each other in the past over that. Whereas it just seems with the Zoomers, it's just they just kind of see it all as like some like options on a spreadsheet that they can just customize, like you're customizing a character in World of Warcraft or something.
I think that's because it's like you said, if people watched, I remember Lost being big and going to the office and everyone saying like, oh yeah, Lost is crazy. It's getting nuts. Or, like some show that everyone's watching. The discussion around that cultural phenomenon is in person, and it's in some ways it's building your IRL. The fact that we even have the term IRL should tell you something. But this, IRL like community, and whereas it's not people still like if you have a popular streamer or a popular content creator or whatever, there's still communities like on Reddit and places like that. It's just all online, right? Like there's still people gathering together after the stream or the show or whatever and discussing it the same way and in some ways that you would have at work the next day after like the shocking conclusion, the season finale of whatever. And so those discussions are still taking place, but because they're online, because they're not there, because they're virtual, they're not they're a little disconnecting, they're a little atomizing, right? Because you can be into all this like weird very hyper specific stuff on the internet and then go to work the next day and try to bring that up around the water cooler, and no one's going to know what the hell you're talking about. You're going to sound like a weirdo, and so it's I think that's partially why you're getting these people that are changing their identity so quickly, is because it's never being reinforced in real life. It's so when that guy that you say like becomes like, oh, I'm going to be a trad cat this week. Did he go to church? Did he go to church for like a few months and meet with a priest and meet other Catholics? Or did he just say online, I'm a trad cat now? And then he ran into some other video that convinced him that he should be a pagan, or like is he really converting, or is he just changing his avatar photo? You know what I mean? Like I think that's really the big difference between now and pre-internet, is if you decided to buy into a niche community or whatever, it required some level of interaction in real life. And now it is disposable, because it not only is it online, in many cases it's anonymous. So it's not that, not only is it stripped of its social pressures of like a face-to-face interaction would have, but it's also there's it's so easy to ghost a community when they don't even know your real name. You know what I mean? Like you feel like that you're not really invested. And I think that's also this, you see this kind of thing, this disposability of relationships seep into the real world, whether it is, the people ghosting other people because they just, that relationship has become, it's no longer advantageous. So they're just going to, even though they've known this person a long time, they'll just never, they'll block them on their phone and whatever.
Think about Facebook. Like Facebook introduced the verb unfriend into the English language.
There you go.
So like being somebody's friend was no longer about the relationship you had with this person. It was a status online. Do you have this little blue check mark beside their name on Facebook? Well, that means that they're your friend. And if you don't have that, they're not your friend. And it's just basically reduced to that.
Well, and you can see this in the way that millennials and people younger treat jobs, right? Like there's and look, I'm guilty of this too. I'll work at a place, and this is very unboomer of me, because boomers will work at the same place 10, 20 years or whatever. And they'll make sure you give your 2 weeks notice and all this other stuff. I fucking ghosted jobs like that. And not because like I feel like I did anything wrong either. It's because I feel like I'm just as disposable to these corporations as my relationship to them was to me, right? So it's I feel that that's kind of just how a lot of people are working. And look, and same thing with even personal relationships. Even if let's say you go someone and you're done with it, you can use that same technology that you just used to end that relationship to or at least start to try to find another one. You can open up Tinder or whatever and be having dinner with some new random person by the weekend. It's really cheapened, I think, human interaction or maybe that's not, maybe that's just how it's perceived by me, having lived in an era, at least briefly, where this was not the norm. Maybe it's just, maybe this is just an evolution of some kind that I'm just not liking. But it does seem to me that it is really devalued personal relationships and community relationships, and which is a shame, because I feel like there's a lot of young people that are dying for that, because of all the institutions that would have maybe kind of filled in that hole in their soul, like whether it was going to church regularly or being a part of a if not an academic institution, maybe the fraternity tied to it, or some kind of institutional social group that of like-minded people that would bring you together in real life and involve you in each other's families and on a regular basis, almost to an extent of like where it's an extended family. And the same isn't true of internet acquaintances, and that's just the way it is. I mean, and it's not because of maybe your lack of desire for that kind of a connection. It's just the practicality, even too, because if you have a community of a very niche thing that you're obsessed with, like let's say you're really into I don't know, like 18th century sewing machines or whatever, right? And you get into this subreddit that has like, maybe it's got 1,000 people. And you're like, oh, I got like 1,000 people that are into this weird, quirky thing that I'm into. Well, yeah, but like none of them live in your state, like one of them lives in Bulgaria, and so to some extent, even if you wanted to meet up in real life, it's everyone's so atomized, and which also I think starts to bolster the idea that, oh yeah, borders are just, they're meaningless, right? They don't mean anything, because most of the people that or I'll tell you, like most of the people that listen to my stream are probably, I mean, I don't know where I don't think they're concentrated in one place, but they're spread all over the world, right? And so it would be easy for someone to look at that and say, well, then why would you care about borders, right? Like it should just be like this free for all, that you shouldn't have all these made up borders by old white men that say where you can and can't go and whatever. It should just be like this planetary government, the EU spread to the entire world kind of a thing. And and I think that's how a lot of millennials, and especially as the technology, the internet started to spread, that's how they were looking at it. That's what they thought it was bringing in. It was bringing in this era of, because that's how they sold the internet. Even I remember, like, they really sold the idea of, oh yeah, you can talk to people from all around the world. That was a big deal. I mean, people forget that even long distance phone calls used to cost like $5 a minute. Like if you were going to call Moscow, that's like a $50 call for like 10 minutes. People didn't have that kind of money. And plus, like, how would you know someone in Moscow to call? But you can get online and now you can see a picture of Red Square, and you can go to a chat room where there's people from, and so like I remember when they first were selling the internet, it was like this way to explore the world digitally, and it broke down all these barriers, and that's why they were also really big about free speech before all the censorship kicked in, right? It was like, oh yeah, this is great, it's this free flow of information. In fact, all these oppressive governments, like the Chinese and whoever, they're going to restrict access to the internet. We got to work really hard to make sure we can free up access to the internet in these countries. Remember that? That's how it was.
Oh yeah.
And now it's the opposite. And it's the same people, by the way. That's the fucked up thing. Yeah. Now it's the same people saying, "Oh, we got to lock it down. It's dangerous."
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I do feel like with for any of our guys, like just knowing a handful of guys in real life who are tuned into this kind of stuff, I think is great, because it doesn't become something that's just that you just experience online, because you want it to be something that you can actually live in your real life to some degree. And I'm fortunate enough that I have this kind of, like, I have a circle of friends. A bunch of them are tuned into this kind of thing, so I don't feel like I'm just like screaming into a void. But I a few years ago, before that was the case, I definitely felt that way. That the entire the thing you mentioned, that with the internet, your relationships are can change in an instant. You could lose your job in an instant. Everything in an instant can just change. It's like it gives you you just have no solid ground to stand on. And I mean, there's no wonder that you see these mental illness, these mental illnesses, like the rates of these just going off the charts. You see, I mean, one thing you'll see with a lot of these studies is that it shows that people who are politically liberal are more likely to be mentally ill, but it also shows that the younger they are, the more likely it is as well. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, it's making, I can see that it's creating the anxiety.
And I think to some extent, I mean, there's a lot of other reasons, but I think to some extent that's why a lot of the people that have been venturing into like homesteading and stuff like that, they find comfort in like the gardening or raising animals or whatever. It's not like a Tamagotchi. It's not like some, like fake plant or animal that if you don't hit the right button at the right time, that that you have to hit restart, or you can reload a save state or something like that. There's real world consequences, right? You don't water your crops, they die. If you don't feed your animals, they die, and then you got to start all over. And plus you get to see them change in real time, day to day. And it's, working with your hands is such an unusual thing for high IQ white people, because often if you're a high IQ white person in Western civilization, you end up in some profession where you're not using your hands. And which isn't to say that I'm sure there's plenty of tradesmen that are high IQ and whatever, but maybe that'll change even more now that, like you said, the statistic about the hiring practices of these companies. But all my friends, I would say that I had my circle of friends and my high school friends, 10 years after high school, my friends all had jobs where, they were just on a computer all day, basically. And then because they were kind of nerds, they were on their computer all night. So they would go into work and sit at a computer and different things. We all did different things. Like I said, I was into video, and I had friends that were into network security, and I had friends that were into marketing and whatever. But essentially, you're all just using computers, and that's how you're answering emails all day long. Rarely, but sometimes you're on conference calls, but that got more and more rare. And it was more about emails and everything else. And then, of course, when COVID hit, I mean, look, even if you had a job where you were meeting in person every day and having some kind of communication, one of the things that COVID ushered in, and I think this was an intentional thing, especially if you look at those documents that came out of that, there was the Larry Page met with Congress prior to COVID, and they were complaining that one of the reasons why China was going to be ahead of the game in terms of AI and some of these new emerging technologies was that it was easier for the Chinese government to just decree technological changes, right? Like there wouldn't be the legacy devices because there wouldn't be a quote unquote market for it, because there was no market. They could just say, no one can use this technology anymore. Now we're using this technology. And so it was a smoother in there, because they're the ones that would benefit from this transition. And so if they could only get these people to start adopting the more futuristic ways of working, then we could be competitive against China, who can just wave a magic communist wand and everyone has to start working from home, if that's what they say, right? And so I think that when COVID happened, then all of a sudden I went from not knowing what Zoom was, and I consider myself relatively internet and computer literate, to like everyone talking about Zoom overnight, and everyone using, which ironically I think is a Chinese platform. But everyone was, courts were using Zoom. It's like they all just one day decided that this was the platform that they were going to use for everything. And so even if you had a job where you went into the office every day, for 2 years, or at least around that, a lot of people were at home on laptops and using Zoom. If even that, a lot of people, they just did conference calls maybe once a week or so. I've been working from home for a really long time, even when I was working for big companies, because I had high dollar equipment at home, and I would just say, like, look, you gave me a computer to work on, but if you want this to be rendered 3 times as fast, I'm working from home. Because that's been kind of normal for me. But I also know that it's not as fun as it can be. It's very isolating. It's very isolating, and it's not, if you're not uh, working for yourself, if you're working on someone else's dime. Because if when I was working for a big corporation with no boss breathing down my neck or whatever, and I was working from home, I'll be honest, I just was not as productive as I would have been if I was at the office, right? And so I think productivity probably took a big hit. And and especially in technology, like, everyone's seen those videos where those girls are like, oh, it's my work at Twitter, I'm going to go to the wine machine, and I'm just like, I'm going to take a 3-hour lunch and get kind of drunk, and they like these weird videos where they just don't do anything all day. And I experienced that too. I worked in places, in offices, where even if you went into the office, like, nothing was really getting done, because you were just all kind of surfing on the over the either the big contract that your company had with a government entity or something. But like, there was money coming in whether you were good at it or not. I think as people get shifted into being at home, working remotely, and they'll be more isolated. But the I think the worst fate is, and I think this is probably why they're actually doing it, is if you have a job that you can do remotely on a laptop, you have a job AI can do. And so all these people, all these non-whites, they got the 95% of these jobs at these Fortune 500 companies. I don't necessarily envy them. I don't think that that's maybe the worst thing. I don't think it's the worst thing if white people start looking towards doing professions that at least for the foreseeable future cannot be automated out of existence.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that if positive change is to come, would it come in the form of like kind of a turning away from the system? And I guess that to kind of we'll finish off soon, but I guess to uh, relate it to the kind of theme of the stream tonight. Uh, do you see any hope with any of these generations? So the boomers, like, I think maybe they're just too old to do anything about it. With them, they're probably going to be cheering on sending billions of dollars in aid to Israel in the coming weeks because because that's what their Hollywood movies told them that was the good thing to do. But I do feel with we can talk about the millennials, that they're really like idealistic, and the Zoomers, they seem messed up. I think with a lot of them though, like, the system really doesn't benefit them, and I feel like maybe a lot of them don't really have that much to lose by turning away. I don't know. I mean, I'm somewhat optimistic that it does feel like a lot of our ideas are becoming more socially acceptable. I mean, you'll still get fired from any corporation for uttering them. You'll still be banned from most of the platforms, but even the censorship seems to be toning down a bit. It does seem like more people are kind of becoming more comfortable, becoming more comfortable expressing our views, or at the very least associating with people who would express our views. So where do you think something positive would come from? Would it come from the Gen Xers, millennials perhaps, and in what form do you think that would be? Would it be from like turning away from the system, or perhaps taking over some of these institutions? What do you think would happen?
Well, I do think the boomers that's a lost cause. They're either mired in QAnon or love of Israel, or straight up communism.
Wouldn't you say QAnon was more like of a Gen X phenomenon though? Because the boomers seem to just watch TV.
No, I mean, there's probably a lot of Gen Xers too, but I would just say all the Q people that I encountered in at least IRL. I guess you're right. Like there is a lot of Gen X crossover.
Because I would think they'd be like in their 40s or so. I don't know.
I'd say it was about half and half, because like I actually personally know a unfortunately large number of boomers that are family members and friends of family that are kind of Q-tarded a little bit. But I have met younger people. Like I remember I had a cabbie. This is when it freaked me out. This is when I was like, oh, this is out of control. I was flying somewhere, so I got like an Uber to the airport, and the cabbie, I don't even know how it came up, but he basically started telling me about QAnon like on the way to the airport, and I was like, the cabbie's telling me about QAnon. Like, what's going on? Like,
Oh no.
if
Well,
it's
I'd be surprised that was he actually white though?
he was whitish. He was like
Okay.
one of those ethnically ambiguous people. He was
Well, I
he
mean,
might have been white.
I'd be more surprised that you actually got a white cabbie.
Yeah, well, it was Uber. So, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends on where you live. In the neighborhood I was in, it was yeah. I mean, he wasn't like he definitely wasn't Aryan, white guy, but he might have been like Greek or something like that. Like he was darker complected and whatever. But yeah, it was so weird. He went on like the entire, and it was a long drive. It was like a half-hour drive to the airport, and like the
Oh
whole
god.
time he was telling me about like how Trump was gonna, you know, kill the deep state with these superhero secret service people, and it was crazy. And I was just I act because I was fascinated. I wanted to know, so I acted very interested because I was just like, oh wow, really, tell me more. And but the whole time I was just like, this is insane. Like and I had there was and she's actually millennial. I had there was a woman I used to work with when I worked in media, and she was on air talent, and she worked in news and whatever. And I hadn't talked to her in many years, and then she found out through a friend that I was doing some political work, and so she reached out to me on actually it was on Telegram, and started trying to tell me about Q. And I was just like, what? You were like a normal person like 5 years ago, And she fully believed that it was prior to obviously the election and all this. I haven't talked to her since that conversation, but she went on this like too long didn't read kind of rant about Q and how Q is real and trust the plan and all this other stuff. And so well, I'll tell you what though, to answer your question, not get too sidetracked on QAnon. I would say that even if a lot of Gen Xers ended up being Q-tards on the right, or some of these two-way, sucking Israel off. They talk a big game about the Second Amendment, but the only time they would actually use their guns is if they were dying for Israel. I think there's a lot of Gen Xers like that on the right, at least in conservative circles, because so much of it is about status. It is culturally in tiny ways. I don't want to give everyone too big of a white pill, but in culturally, it seems to me is as if being pro-Jewish and pro-Israel is getting less cool. Like it's not as cool as it used to be. Now it's still the mainstream. It's still exactly what like what you're going to hear from Ben Shapiro, obviously, but not just the Jewish commentators, but even like the Catholic ones. Any mainstream right-wing commentator is going to be 100%. Like Sean Hannity, for example, and anyone like that is going to be full on for Israel. And I get it. But it used to be there was zero pushback. And if there was any pushback, it was, from extreme, very fringy kind of people or people that didn't have platforms. Right. And now it's becoming less and less of a thing. And I think partially because as you can't talk about Gen X without mentioning that Elon Musk is Gen X. And I think that he has a little bit of that internet that I was talking about, like, we need to spread this to all the countries that have oppressive governments and whatever. I think he has a little bit of that residue in his head, because he helped start PayPal and stuff, right? So he was like a nerd when he was younger and the internet was first getting going. He lived through all that, right? So he might be a CivNet, and he might be more interested in class than he is in race and things like that. But I don't think you can separate him from his environment. He also grew up in South Africa. So, or some, maybe that has influenced him in some way. I don't know, but at least the way that he's talking, even though it is very gatekeepery, it's very, it's very measured, and he seems to like really still be very philo-Semitic. That would still be in line with what we're talking about. The 90s were probably the most philo-Semitic decade of the universe. Everything in mainstream media was very openly, Jewish, and it was really cool to be Jewish in the 90s. Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David and all this other stuff. And there was, it wasn't, and in fact, it was so cool. Jews weren't even that paranoid. Like if you made a Jewish joke. I mean, I had a Jewish friend in the 90s, and I remember like opening up the oven in the kitchen and saying, I'm just looking for your family or something like that. Right. And he laughed.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
This is on you. This is on YouTube.
Oh, well,
yeah, it's all right.
But he laughed at it. He thought it was funny, and he wasn't sensitive about it. And I think that that's the environment that Elon comes from to some degree, where that's how he so whether his motives are good or not, I don't know, but at least that's the environment that he came from. And I'll tell you what, if nothing else, because everyone is status seeking, everyone's a social climber. I mean, he's the richest man in the world. So if he's setting a tone that this is what I think is right, sure, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree with that, but you're going to have a lot of people who used to maybe think that it was very low class and very passe to say X, Y, and Z, or to allow X, Y, and Z to be spoken in polite company. They're going to see the richest man in the world engaging in this kind of speech, retweeting Keith Woods and all this other stuff. And all of a sudden, it's now okay, or it's less taboo. So I think that might be part of the change that will take place as the boomers kind of die off. The millennials, I mean, I don't know, I think like the Zoomers, they get a bad rap. I mean, because they have extreme, like, I can't think of like an extremist Gen Xer, right? Like if you ask me, like draw me a caricature of an extreme Gen Xer, it's like I would struggle to do that. But if you were to ask me to conjure up an extreme millennial or an extreme Zoomer, I could do that, or even Boomer, I could do that. And so I think that the millennials have like these caricatures that are among them that kind of like that guy that got stabbed or whatever. That many people, they see these examples, and because they're real, I mean, they are real. I mean, stereotypes exist for a reason. But there's no knowing exactly, like one, and plus I think that generations change. Like there's no telling what these people will do when and if they're ever given power. I do think that all this oppressive censorship type stuff has originated from millennial women getting into positions of power, right? Like how old was Susan Wojcicki? Like what was her age?
I think she's in her 40s or 50s, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, like she's old millennial or young Gen X.
It'd be probably Gen X, but I get what you mean. Like you just, when you think of censorship, you just think it's going to be some like pink-haired 35-year-old woman banning you from Twitter or whatever it is.
Right. That's so I think, and I'll tell you what, I worked with a libertarian group years ago, and they were doing polling data, and I remember them. It was weird that they weren't concerned about this. I was doing a video for them, and one of the things that freaked me the fuck out about, like, okay, that we're in trouble, because this was years ago. This is before Trump and everything else. And the statistic was they would poll college students, and which in my experience, the most free speech people in the world, right? Like that's, or in the 90s and the early 2000s, that's if there were people protesting for free speech, that's who it would be. It'd be like the run-of-the-mill college kids or whatever. And they polled college students, and there was a significant jump. It went from I think 5 to 25%, where they asked them, "Do you think the First Amendment goes too far?" And 25% said yes. And I saw this and I was like, "Are you sure about this data? Like, is this a reputable poll?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they showed, I was like, "Wow, this is concerning." Like if 25% of college kids right now, and this would have been like maybe around 2010-ish or so. So this was, about the time it takes, for those college kids to get into positions where they can censor you. But if 25% of them think that the First Amendment goes too far, we're in trouble. And especially if this is a trend line, it's obviously trending up. And sure enough, just year after year after year, censorship became more of a problem. I think it will. I don't think it will continue to be a problem that we'll always have to fight to some degree, because information's power, and so there's always going to be a fight over who wields that power. And I think the millennials' strategy, it will be to silence opposition. And I think you'll see that. I think you're also going to see a lot of this diversity stuff. It's already baked in. There's no undoing it. There's no undo button on this. And there's no saved state of the file. Like America is just, the file's been corrupted. It is what it is. And I think the millennials will just further solidify that and make it more unrecognizable. And Zoomers, I don't know. Zoomers, it's like, it's kind of that X factor. I feel like they're a generation of extremists to some degree. I don't know that there's a lot of centrist Zoomers. Maybe there are. But I feel like, at least in my experience, Zoomers are either like full on, lopping their genitalia off and going all in on the craziest of stuff, or they are one step away from full fash. So
that's been my experience with them too.
Yeah, so it's real tough to say.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with what you said, that the fact that someone like Musk, he's not our guy. I don't think he shares our beliefs per se, but the fact that he will actually engage with them, and that he doesn't consider somebody who expresses his views to be repugnant. So I feel like we've kind of become more of a part of the discussion than we had been in the prior. And then also, when you said, like, with the Zoomers, yeah, they some of them do go full. They seem to go full bore, whatever it is. But then again, they also seem to flip on a dime. Right. So it's a wild card. So I'm not entirely sure either. But
I just had a thought, like, because they're a very volatile generation, which really could lead to a volatile future. Because if you got people that are extremists on two very polar opposite sides, and they have a willingness to change their views on it in relatively short order and just go with whatever's popular, I feel like that's a recipe for some very transformative stuff that that isn't necessarily good.
Well, it could be a recipe for some stuff that is good, though. Possibly. Yeah, it's a wild card. Anyway, I think we've pretty much exhausted the subject. I think we can probably finish soon. Is there anything you'd like to say to finish, Devin?
No, just, I guess, if you want to check out my stream, the Insomnia stream is on Wednesdays and Saturdays, 10 p.m. I think Pacific time, and it's Odysee Odysee.com / I think it's / black. I don't know. Look up Black Pilled on Odysee.
I got it in the description. So for anyone who by some miracle has never seen Devin's content before, then it's linked down below.
There you go. And I don't know if there's going to be a stream tomorrow, but there might be, but there will be for sure on Saturday.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and thank you to everyone for listening. I'll talk to y'all later. Good night.